The courtroom was filled with an air of tension, the kind that makes the hairs on the back of your neck stand up. It was a high-profile case, one that had attracted media attention from every corner of the nation. The courtroom, adorned with heavy oak furniture and a large American flag fluttering near the judge's bench, felt almost suffocating with the weight of the moment. On one side, Pam Bondi, the sharp, composed Attorney General of the United States, stood confidently at her position. Her reputation had preceded her. She was known for being tough, relentless, and a political force in her own right. On the other side, a judge who had earned his position through connections and backdoor deals, Judge Conrad Davis, was overseeing the proceedings. Judge Davis was notorious for his leniency toward corrupt figures in high places. His close ties with a network of wealthy elites made him a man with nothing to lose, or so he thought. Today, however, would be a different story. The case at hand was a complex one involving a major financial scandal that had been shaking the country. A group of powerful businessmen had been embezzling funds from various public funds and funneling them into their personal accounts, all while avoiding any legal consequences. Bondi had been tasked with prosecuting the case, and she was determined to bring them to justice, no matter how high the stakes. As the trial proceeded, Bondi stood up to make her argument, her voice steady but filled with unwavering conviction. "Your Honor, the evidence against these men is irrefutable. We've uncovered years of illicit activities, siphoning public funds for their personal gain. This is not just a financial crime. It's a betrayal of the American people. These individuals, led by Robert Stone, have built an empire based on greed, corruption, and lies." Judge Davis, who had been glancing at his notes without much interest, finally lifted his eyes from the papers. He had a smirk on his face, an expression that indicated his deep contempt for the proceedings. "Ms. Bondi," he began, his voice dripping with sarcasm, "you're claiming that these men are guilty, but where's the proof? You've got a few documents, a couple of shady transactions, but where's the real smoking gun?" Bondi's eyes narrowed. She knew what he was trying to do: discredit the case, belittle her efforts, and make her look weak in front of the jury. But she wasn't about to back down. "Your Honor," she replied with a cold, controlled fury, "I'm here to ensure that justice is served, not to entertain your games. These men have stolen billions from the people who can least afford it. If you're not willing to see that, then perhaps you should reconsider whether you belong in this courtroom." Judge Davis leaned forward, his eyes locked onto Bondi's. "If you think you can intimidate me with your political rhetoric, you're sorely mistaken. I've seen far worse in my day, and I've never been swayed by public opinion." The words stung, but Bondi remained unfazed. "I'm not trying to intimidate you, Your Honor," she said, her voice low and steady. "But you are corrupt and you will pay for it." For a moment, there was silence in the room. The jury sat on edge, unsure of what would happen next. Even the stenographer paused, sensing that something monumental was about to unfold. Judge Davis, now visibly enraged, slammed his hand down on the bench. "You are out of line, Ms. Bondi. You will show respect in my courtroom. If you can't handle the pressure, maybe you should step down and let someone else do your job." But Bondi was done with games. Her words were a thunderous roar in the otherwise quiet room. "You don't scare me, Judge. And you'll be the one stepping down when your empire crumbles." The courtroom gasped. The tension was palpable and the weight of her words was felt by everyone present. Judge Davis, for the first time in his life, seemed unsure of himself. His smirk faded, replaced by a flicker of doubt in his eyes. As the minutes ticked by, no one knew it yet, but this confrontation would mark the beginning of the end for Judge Conrad Davis. In the next 4 minutes, his corrupt empire would begin to unravel. The courtroom was still, the weight of Bondi's words hanging in the air like a storm waiting to break. Judge Davis's face was an unreadable mask, but his clenched fists betrayed his frustration. He had built his career on manipulation, on cozying up to the right people and ensuring that his own pockets remained lined with cash. He had never met anyone like Pam Bondi before. The moment she had spoken those words, "You'll be the one stepping down when your empire crumbles," he felt a shift deep within him. It wasn't just the threat of a political adversary, it was the sudden realization that his long-held fortress of power was under attack. He'd gotten away with his corrupt dealings for years, but now the truth was beginning to shine through. "Enough," Judge Davis muttered, trying to regain control over the situation. His gavel came down again with a force that reverberated through the room. This court will recess for 10 minutes. Pam Bondi, you are hereby warned. Before he could finish his sentence, a phone rang from the back of the courtroom. It was a loud, obnoxious sound that immediately caught everyone's attention. A few heads turned to see where the disruption had come from, and some even glanced nervously at Bondi as if wondering if it was one of her people making an illicit move. Judge Davis, red in the face, turned toward the court bailiff and ordered, "Who was making that noise? I will have them removed." But the phone continued to ring. Then, to everyone's surprise, the bailiff stood still, his eyes wide with disbelief. "Your Honor, it's coming from the evidence vault," he said, his voice faltering. "The evidence vault where all the documents and proof regarding the case were stored." Bondi's eyes flicked to the vault. Something was off. The phone, clearly ringing from inside, was not a coincidence. In that moment, she realized something far greater was at play, something that might just expose Davis for who he truly was. Judge Davis, now visibly shaken, hurriedly commanded the bailiff to open the vault. The tension in the room thickened as everyone watched in stunned silence. Bondi, however, was calm. This was no coincidence. She had anticipated something like this happening. Her team had worked tirelessly to ensure that the documents, phone records, and hidden files linking Judge Davis to the corrupt network of businessmen and politicians were securely locked away and ready to be revealed at the perfect moment. The bailiff opened the vault, revealing a phone sitting atop a stack of classified files. The phone wasn't just an ordinary device. Bondi knew this was a trap set for the judge. As the bailiff picked it up, the screen lit up with a series of encrypted messages, each one more damning than the last. Judge Davis tried to regain composure, but his voice was shaky. "What is this nonsense? I am not interested in games, Miss Bondi. Remove that phone at once." But Bondi wasn't about to let him control the narrative. "Your Honor," she said coolly, "this phone contains records of communications between you and several individuals involved in the financial scandal we are investigating. You've been feeding them information about our case. And that's just the tip of the iceberg." The room fell silent again. All eyes were now fixed on Judge Davis. The weight of the accusation hit him like a ton of bricks. He tried to laugh it off, but the tremor in his voice betrayed him. "You have no proof of such claims." Bondi smiled, her eyes glinting with the sharpness of her resolve. "You're wrong, Your Honor. The phone was found in your vault, and it's not just any phone. It's the one you've been using to coordinate with the very people who are under investigation. It's about to get a lot worse for you." At that moment, the door to the courtroom swung open, and 2 FBI agents entered, their presence commanding immediate attention. One of them held up a small, black hard drive. "We've just completed the transfer, Ms. Bondi," one agent said, his voice steady. "Everything's here. Bank transfers, phone records, wiretaps, everything. Judge Davis, you're officially under investigation for obstruction of justice, bribery, and conspiracy to defraud the American people." The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Judge Davis's face had turned an almost unnatural shade of pale, his eyes darting around the room as though searching for a way out. But there was no escape. "Your Honor," Bondi said with quiet confidence, "you've made a grave mistake, but now it's time for the truth to come out." The bailiff placed the phone on the witness stand, and the evidence began to unfold. The encrypted messages on the phone revealed conversations with Robert Stone, the businessman at the center of the financial scandal, detailing how they conspired to avoid paying taxes on hundreds of millions of dollars. Another set of messages showed a direct line to members of Congress, arranging secret meetings to manipulate laws for their personal gain. Judge Davis, who had spent years evading justice, was now staring at the very thing that would bring his empire crashing down. His mind raced, trying to find a way to escape the consequences. But in that moment, he knew it was over. "Order in the court," he barked, his voice cracking. "I won't stand for this. I am the judge here. You can't just..." But his words were lost. The room had already turned against him. Bondi had secured the victory. It was no longer just about the case. It was about exposing the corruption that ran deep through the system. The house of cards had begun to collapse. Judge Davis stood frozen, his hands shaking at his sides as the implications of what was unfolding began to sink in. The courtroom was no longer just a place of legal proceedings. It had become the stage for the unraveling of a system built on corruption, deceit, and manipulation. Bondi had exposed him, and now, as the evidence poured in, his once impenetrable empire was crumbling before his eyes. The FBI agents who had arrived with the hard drive began their meticulous work of securing all the relevant evidence. They carefully began pulling documents from the vault, ensuring everything was logged and cataloged. The atmosphere in the room was tense, but there was a quiet sense of victory among those who had worked tirelessly to bring this corrupt judge to justice. Bondi stood near the bench, her expression calm but resolute. She knew that this moment was just the beginning. Judge Davis, his face a mask of panic, glanced toward the defense lawyers seated at the tables. They had been the ones helping him cover his tracks for years, but now they were too scared to even make eye contact with him. They had seen the writing on the wall. No amount of legal maneuvering or well-timed objections would save him now. "Your Honor," one of the defense lawyers called, his voice trembling, "perhaps we should take a recess." "Recess?" Bondi interrupted, her voice steady and unyielding. "This trial has no more recesses. Not for you, not for anyone involved in the web of deceit you've spun." She turned her gaze back to Judge Davis, her eyes narrowing. "You thought you could get away with it, didn't you? You thought you could manipulate the law and get rich in the process. Well, now the world knows the truth. And it's not just you who will pay the price." Davis's breath hitched as he stood there, trying to muster some form of defense. "This is a setup, Ms. Bondi. You have no idea what you're doing. You're making a huge mistake. You can't." "I'm making no mistake, Your Honor," she interrupted coldly. "The mistake was yours from the very beginning. The mistake was thinking you were untouchable." Bondi's words rang out sharp and final. She wasn't speaking just to the judge, she was speaking to the entire room, to everyone who had turned a blind eye to the rampant corruption that had been allowed to fester for far too long. The walls of the courtroom seemed to close in around Judge Davis, and for the first time he felt a sense of vulnerability that he had never known. As the FBI agents continued to seize documents and digital evidence, Bondi turned to the jury. Their faces were a mixture of disbelief and awe as they had just witnessed something extraordinary. For most of them, this case was just another high-profile trial, but what had just transpired went far beyond a legal argument. It was a moment of reckoning. The prosecutor, who had been working with Bondi on the case, approached her with a set of papers. "Ms. Bondi, we've just confirmed that the money transfers were indeed funneled through a shell corporation linked to Judge Davis. We've also found connections to several other political figures who were involved in this scheme." Bondi nodded, her face a portrait of resolve. "Good. Let's make sure the public knows the full extent of his crimes. And let's make sure that he doesn't get a chance to manipulate the system again." It was clear now, the fall of Judge Davis wasn't just the fall of one man, it was the beginning of a much larger investigation that would spread throughout the political and legal networks that had enabled this kind of corruption. Bondi knew that this victory would not be easy to digest for many, especially those who had been complicit in the system. But she was prepared to take them all on. Judge Davis, on the other hand, was crumbling fast. He knew that the game was over, that his life as he knew it was about to be turned upside down. His mind raced, frantically trying to find a way out of the disaster that was unfolding. But there was nothing left to hold on to. He turned to the bailiff, his voice a desperate whisper. "Get me a phone. I need to make a call. This can't end like this." The bailiff hesitated, his face a mixture of confusion and concern. "Sir, this isn't now," Davis shouted, his desperation palpable. But the bailiff refused. The world was watching, and Judge Davis was no longer in control. A series of rapid footsteps echoed from the back of the room as more law enforcement officers entered, this time from a different agency, the Department of Justice. They had arrived to ensure that the case against Davis was handled with the full force of the law. A high-ranking officer approached Bondi and nodded. "Ms. Bondi, we have the necessary warrants. We'll be taking Judge Davis into custody now," the officer said. Davis, realizing that he had no more allies in the room, turned to Bondi one last time. His voice cracked as he muttered, "You've made a grave mistake. You think you're winning, but this is only the beginning. You can't stop what's coming." Bondi met his gaze with a steely resolve. "I already have, Your Honor. Your empire is finished. There's no going back." As Davis was handcuffed and escorted out of the courtroom, the room buzzed with the kind of energy that only comes from witnessing the collapse of something monumental. Bondi stood still, her eyes unwavering as she watched him being led away. She had won, but she knew this was just the beginning. The investigation was about to widen, and more names, powerful names, would soon be drawn into the light. In the days to come, headlines would scream about the fall of Judge Conrad Davis and the corruption he had hidden for so long. The ripple effect would be felt throughout the nation. But for now, in this moment, Bondi felt a sense of accomplishment. She had exposed the truth. and the truth was unstoppable. The news broke within hours of Judge Davis being escorted out of the courtroom, handcuffed and humiliated. The scandal was far-reaching as investigations into the corrupt dealings of the judge exploded across the media. The public, long suspicious of the systemic corruption in politics and the legal system, now had the truth laid bare before them. Pam Bondi, the unyielding attorney general, was hailed as a hero. But for her, this was more than a personal victory, it was a turning point. It was the moment when the people finally had a glimpse of the rot that had been festering at the heart of their government. In the days following the courtroom showdown, Bondi worked tirelessly with federal investigators, piecing together the web of deceit that had allowed Judge Davis and his accomplices to thrive. The phone records, the hard drive, the bank transfers all pointed to something far more insidious than anyone had anticipated. It wasn't just Judge Davis. He had been a part of a much larger operation that spanned several high-profile politicians, businessmen, and even members of the judiciary. Bondi was relentless. Every lead was pursued with precision. Every hidden document was uncovered, no matter how deeply buried. It soon became clear that Judge Davis was not the only one with blood on his hands. As federal agents cracked open more vaults, both literal and metaphorical, the full extent of the corruption became evident. It wasn't just about bribery or backroom deals. It was about a long-standing system designed to manipulate justice for personal gain, where the rich and powerful were untouchable and the average citizen had no hope of ever seeing real justice. One evening, Bondi sat alone in her office, going over the latest batch of files. She was exhausted, her eyes red from lack of sleep, but she couldn't afford to rest. The pressure was mounting. Word was that the other conspirators were already trying to cover their tracks, using their wealth and influence to shut down the investigation. She had to stay one step ahead. She picked up the phone and dialed a number, her fingers steady despite the weight of the situation. "Detective Thompson," she said when the phone picked up, "I need you to move fast. We've got new leads pointing to a cover-up operation involving several members of Congress. This goes deeper than we thought." "Understood, ma'am," Thompson replied. "We're on it. Do you want us to go public with what we have so far?" "No," Bondi said, her voice firm. "We need to bring everyone down at once. Timing is everything. If we tip our hand too early, they'll destroy the evidence before we can act." For Bondi, the stakes had never been higher. She wasn't just fighting to expose one corrupt judge, she was fighting to take down an entire system. A system that had been operating in the shadows, shielded by power, wealth, and influence. The next morning, an urgent meeting was scheduled at the Department of Justice. Bondi arrived early, her mind racing with all the developments of the past few days. When she walked into the conference room, the team was already assembled. FBI agents, financial auditors, and law enforcement officers from multiple agencies were all present, their faces grim but determined. "Ms. Bondi," one of the senior agents began, "we've secured a warrant to search the accounts of several individuals involved in the scheme. We've already traced the money to shell companies registered overseas. We have enough evidence to take down several high-profile figures, but there's a catch." Bondi raised an eyebrow, sensing something wasn't right. "What's the catch?" "The catch is, those figures are well connected," the agent continued, glancing around the room as if making sure no one else could hear. "They have friends in the highest places. People who will do whatever it takes to stop us." Bondi leaned forward, her expression unwavering. "If they think they can stop us, they're mistaken. We've got the truth on our side. We just need to make sure we act before they can cover it up." The meeting proceeded with a sense of urgency. Bondi's team had to move quickly, and everyone knew it. The enemies they were up against weren't just criminals, they were power brokers, and they wouldn't go down without a fight. As the days wore on, the media frenzy intensified. People who had once been skeptical of Bondi's investigation now rallied behind her. News outlets across the country picked up the story, turning Judge Davis from a mere figurehead of corruption into a symbol of everything that was wrong with the system. Headlines screamed about the judge's ties to politicians and powerful businessmen, all of whom had profited from his decisions in court. His name became synonymous with the systemic failure of justice, and the public outcry grew louder. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, the corrupt network began to fracture. Several of Judge Davis's closest allies turned on each other in a desperate attempt to save themselves. One by one, key figures began to break under pressure, confessing to their roles in the conspiracy. Bondi, however, knew that the true fight was yet to come. The most dangerous players in this game were still free, and they would stop at nothing to ensure that the investigation was derailed. As she sat in her office late one evening reviewing yet another stack of files, a call came through. It was a tip from an anonymous source, someone who claimed to have insider information about a meeting scheduled between some of the most powerful figures involved in the scheme. The source had one condition: Bondi needed to act fast. She called her team, and within minutes they were on their way to the location. The stakes were higher now. This was no longer just about taking down a judge. It was about bringing down an entire corrupt network that had infiltrated the highest levels of power. Bondi's phone rang again, this time with a call from her deputy. "Ms. Bondi, we've got the location. It's a private meeting being held at a mansion in Virginia. We need to move quickly." Bondi hung up and stood up from her desk. Her resolve had never been stronger. The pieces were finally falling into place. This was her moment, her chance to dismantle the corrupt empire that had been built on the backs of the American people. As she made her way to the car, she knew that the battle wasn't over. It had only just begun. The tension was palpable as Bondi and her team sped toward the mansion in Virginia, a secluded estate hidden deep within a wooded area. As they neared the location, Bondi's mind raced. This was the moment that could change everything. If they were able to capture the individuals at this meeting and secure their confessions, it would mark the end of the road for the corrupt empire that had been ruling the justice system for years. The mansion loomed in the distance, its grandiose architecture starkly contrasting the darkness of the night. Bondi's car came to a screeching halt as her team gathered in the dim light. They had arrived. The mission was clear: this was a high-risk operation. The people inside this mansion were powerful, dangerous, and well-connected. Bondi turned to her team, her voice calm yet resolute. "We move fast. No mistakes. We've got one shot at this." Her deputy nodded, and the agents quickly moved into position, taking up their places around the perimeter of the estate. Bondi, always a step ahead, had already coordinated with local authorities and federal agents for backup should things escalate. There was no room for failure. Inside the mansion, a small but exclusive group of political elites and businessmen had gathered, most of them unaware that their time was running out. The source had been right: the key players were all in one place, and they were about to make a deal that could keep them free from any prosecution. Bondi's team moved swiftly, taking control of the security around the estate. The mansion's security cameras blinked as agents disabled them one by one, rendering the mansion's internal security useless. Everything was in place. The plan was simple: arrest the key individuals, secure the evidence, and get out before any of them could make a call or flee. However, Bondi knew this wouldn't be easy. The people inside the mansion had the means and connections to fight back, and the element of surprise would be crucial. As the agents infiltrated the mansion, Bondi received a call on her phone. It was Detective Thompson, and the urgency in his voice was immediate. "We've got a problem. Word's gotten out. They're already moving. 2 of the individuals in the meeting are trying to flee. We need to act now." Bondi's heart rate quickened, but her voice remained steady. "Don't let them escape. We've come this far. We can't let them slip away now." With the signal to move, Bondi's team surged forward, breaching the mansion's doors with precision. The first room they entered was quiet, too quiet. But as they pushed forward, they found the first of the key players, an influential senator who had been involved in the corruption. He was sitting at the table, sipping whiskey, looking completely unaware of the impending danger. Bondi wasted no time. "Senator Peterson," she said coolly, stepping forward, "you're under arrest for your role in a nationwide corruption scheme." The senator froze, his eyes darting to the agents surrounding him. "This is madness. You can't do this." "I think it's a little too late for that," Bondi interrupted. She nodded to one of her agents, who quickly placed the senator in handcuffs. "You'll have plenty of time to explain yourself in court." Just as Bondi was about to leave the room, a loud noise erupted from the hallway. Another agent's radio crackled to life. "We've got a runner. One of the businessmen just tried to flee. He's heading for the back exit." Bondi's eyes narrowed. "We can't afford any escapes." She led her team through the darkened halls of the mansion, the distant sound of footsteps echoing as the man sprinted toward the back door. Bondi and her team were close, but the businessman had a head start. The chase was on. As Bondi rounded the corner, she saw the back door swing open just as the businessman, one of the primary financiers behind the operation, stepped into the night. His face paled when he saw Bondi and her team rushing toward him. "You won't get away," Bondi shouted. "It's over." The man hesitated for a split second, but that was all Bondi needed. With a swift motion, she tackled him to the ground, her agents moving in to secure him. "You don't understand, do you?" the man gasped, struggling beneath her. "You've won a battle, but you haven't won the war. There are too many people in this game. Too many powerful people who will never let you take us down." Bondi stood up, pulling him to his feet. "You're wrong," she said coldly. "The war is already over. You're just too blind to see it. They moved quickly, securing the businessman and bringing him back inside the mansion. As the remaining key players were arrested one by one, the mansion began to feel like the site of a historic collapse. The empire that had ruled with corruption for so long was now on its knees, its leaders bound and shackled. Back in the main room, Bondi stood before the captured figures. The leaders of the corrupt empire, now exposed, had no way out. They knew their time had come. Their wealth, influence, and political connections had been insufficient to save them from the truth. This is just the beginning, Bondi said, her voice cutting through the silence. You thought you could control the system. You thought you could escape the law. But the law always finds a way. As the criminals were loaded into police cars, Bondi couldn't help but feel a sense of victory. The system had been rigged for far too long, and now it was being dismantled piece by piece. The truth had come to light, and it was undeniable. But Bondi knew this wasn't the end. It was just the start of a much larger revolution, a revolution that would forever change the way the American justice system operated. The corruption that had once been so deeply embedded in the government was now being exposed. The fight for justice had taken a huge step forward, and there was no turning back. As the agents left the mansion, Bondi stood alone for a moment, looking at the ruins of what had once been a network of power and greed. She knew the path ahead would be difficult, but she was ready for it. The empire was no more. And the people of America had a fighting chance at true justice.